All right, you guys. It is March 15th, 2026, and this is your Iran war sit rep. No end in sight, for sure. This is another monster of a sit rep. I remember 3 years ago when I would sit down, I mean, not quite, but two something years ago when I would sit down to do a sit rep at the end of the night. Everybody in the house was asleep. I would open a few tabs and I would just, kind of talk into the camera. Mental notes of what I, had seen and was thinking. Maybe a few links. And now I have this monster of an outline. 5 sections. So no, 8 sections. In this video, we have 8 sections. The first one is about how no ceasefire. I will briefly address the United Nations non-veto, very briefly. The nuclear issue, which I think will be the most important point that I'll make tonight. The fact that Iran is attacking military targets first and why. The fact that we've entered the economic war phase. And a specific part on the oil weapon, if you will. Section 6 is on the Lebanon front, including Naim Qassem's speech. Section 7 and 8 are on the remaining options available to the US and Israel, which don't seem to be, none of them seem to be a slam dunk for winning this thing. Okay, so the reason there's no end in sight is because the Iranians don't want a ceasefire. They have repeatedly said, I've only been really looking at Iranian sources. I figure you guys can get the American voice and the Israeli voice from other places. I've been looking at Iranian sources, and the Iranian officials are saying the Americans reach out, ask us for a ceasefire, ask us for our ceasefire conditions, and we tell them we don't have any ceasefire conditions because we don't want a ceasefire. The Iranian government doesn't want a ceasefire, and I've also seen men on the street, women on the street, people who are out on the streets during bombings every night, every day. And they are saying, we don't want a ceasefire. Don't talk to us about a ceasefire. We're not interested in a ceasefire. Amal Saad, who's a professor, a Lebanese background professor, I think based in the UK, wrote a book on Hezbollah, highly recommended. Politics and Religion, I believe is the subtitle. She wrote about this, how Iran has, they're either going to get a total ceasefire or they're going to continue with total war. They don't want to do this thing where they continuously get eroded in their power by this endless cycle that they're trying to break of getting destroyed, accepting a ceasefire, getting destroyed some more, and accepting a ceasefire. And I am increasingly seeing more and more parallels to Russia, Ukraine. I told you guys I was studying Russia, Ukraine very closely for many years without talking about it because I stay in my lane. And when the Russia sphere people got really became Palestine experts, I was a little irritated by the clueless way that they talked about it. And the fact that they're many of them are de facto Zionists as well. So I didn't want to make that analogous mistake myself by wading into this topic that I was researching mainly because I was fascinated with the military aspect, nothing else. I don't have any kind of real human connections. There's a lot of Ukrainian people that live around here, that I grew up with, but that's not I don't That's because I live in Toronto where there's people from everywhere, all over. So I don't, it's not my lane. I don't know. So I told you guys I'm not like going to do reporting on this conflict, but I do see a lot of analogies because, Russia did make these Munich 1 and Munich 2 deals. And the West, the Germans, the Americans, they just laughed and they thought, oh my God, we duped these stupid Russians into these deals that we have no intention of fulfilling. And then starting in 2022, Russia attacked Ukraine. And I thought that was all a bluff. There was a lead up where I thought, Russia's not going to do that. This is all being overblown and overhyped by the West for whatever reason. I didn't know because Russia had this history of capitulating and doing these deals. And I thought, this is all the usual fear mongering about Russia in the West. And then Russia started this special, they call it the special military operation. And for 4 years going on and more, they have said they don't want a ceasefire. They said they're going to have denazification of Ukraine, demilitarization of Ukraine, and imposed neutrality on Ukraine. Ukraine is not going to be allowed to be part of a Western military alliance. And that was understood to be just incredibly maximalist and not achievable. And so nobody knew. The West was just saying, what is Russia doing? What are they thinking? How can they make these kinds of demands that are not fulfillable? The West is invincible. Ukraine has American backing. There's no way the Russians are going to demilitarize, impose a different political system on Ukraine and enforce neutrality on them. That's not going to happen. Ukraine is huge, and Ukraine has the unlimited backing of the United States and all of Europe. How is Russia going to do that? Russia is going to back down when they run out of missiles, And Russia said, no, we're not backing down. This war is about our existence ultimately. We're not going to be picked apart by the West. And so if that means we're going to go to war for years and years, we're going to go to war for years and years. And they're going to keep going until they feel like the West no longer has the option of picking them to pieces. And now Iran, that's the analogy that I see with Iran. And I think about Iran, the JCPOA and the deal that they accepted, the nuclear deal, and then how they kept going back to the table and people were just like, oh my God, what is this negotiation? What is this capitulation? Why are they offering to give up their uranium? And there appeared to be these conflicts even where the elected government would say, we're making progress. And then the supreme leader would say, we're not going to give up our enrichment rights no matter what. And when you're in a negotiation, according to American negotiation theory from the Harvard Negotiation Project or the Yale version, you take a deal that might not be favorable to you because it's the best deal you can get when you're not in a good negotiating position, and the other side has a much better position and has much better leverage and it is in a much better, has much more power in the negotiation. Then you might take a very disadvantageous deal, which the JCPOA was to Iran, which Munich 1 and 2 were to Russia. Or you might, if you're going and negotiating with Israel or the pro-Israel people, they treat you like you're stupid, and maybe you take a bad deal because you're stupid, and maybe there's some combination. But if you've been following me for a while, that I'm not a big believer in stupidity. I think it's a huge mistake to believe your opponent is stupid. I don't really believe anybody's stupid. If you are facing somebody who is behaving in a way that you think is stupid, you should probably work a little harder to see how they see the world. They're probably working on a different logic than you. Now, is there stupidity? Yeah, there's stupidity. But and you're thinking about this ground troops plan, and I will talk about it, Karg Island. I know that that looks pretty stupid on the surface, but there's a logic behind that too. I'll get back to that as well. But my point is here that Iran or Russia, however you want to, whichever side you want to look at this analogy, was probably in a position where they did not feel that they had a choice except to take whatever deal was offered there. And now they're no longer in that position, partly because the deal they accepted came with being left alone and having peace, and in Iran's case, an end to sanctions and the ability to kind of be treated as a normal country instead of a country that's slated for the chopping block, basically. And that deal's no longer on the table. Israel and the US have said we're going to destroy Iran no matter what they agree to. So there's no point in doing a deal. And they're not stupid either. So they're not in a position where they have to take the deal. The deal is not a better deal than fighting. Fighting is a better deal. And they have the ability to fight. So they're fighting. And that is why there's no end in sight. On March 11th, Iran announced a change in how they're approaching the war. They called it a change from reciprocal strikes to continuous strikes. And that means prior to this, if Iran and the US would hit something, Iran would hit something equivalent on the other side. If they hit a military target, Iran would hit a military target. If they hit an oil facility, Iran would hit an oil facility. If they hit a water plant, Iran would hit a water plant. So Iran, that's a good strategy to follow. Once again, according to game theory, it's called tit for tat. It is the best way proven mathematically to be the best way to achieve something like nuclear disarmament. You do a little bit, I do a little bit. You escalate a little bit, I escalate a little bit. You de-escalate a little bit, I de-escalate a little bit. So then it's a kind of a safe way for everybody to climb down from the brink. But Iran is not trying to climb down from the brink anymore. They're not trying to deter. They're trying to establish a completely different status quo. They don't want to stop the war anymore. There are outlets like The Economist saying we're going to have to maybe reluctantly hold our nose and make a deal with the regime. There are outlets in Israel saying the same thing. There are politicians, American politicians, saying the same thing. Trump needs to stop the war and get out of it now. But it's not up to him anymore. And that's again, one of the logical fallacies, which you could call the supremacist fallacy or the racist fallacy, which is that you get in to a war when you want and get out of the war when you want. And Iran is part of the new reality that Iran is trying to establish is no, you don't get to decide when you start and stop the war. We get to decide. You can decide to start it, sure, nobody can prevent that, but we decide when it ends, not you. And the U.S. completely has fouled all hope of ceasefires by assassinating the negotiators over and over again. And again, Iran is, fool me 2, 3, 10 times, shame on me, right? One of the Iranian commanders, Mohsen Rezaieh, said, "There will be no truce this time. Iran's missiles are endless. We will bring the U.S. to its knees. The Americans will face the fate of Hitler in the snows of Russia." I'm no doubt they considered that analogy before they used it. That is the end of Section 1, no end in sight. We now move on to Section 2, the United Nations. Russia and China didn't veto. I know you guys are mad that they didn't veto. I'm not that mad about it. I wish there would have been a veto, sure, but I'm not going to do this every time. I didn't expect a veto. I wouldn't have been really excited about a veto, and I'm not devastated that there wasn't a veto. Over this genocide, the United States flamed the UN and flamed international law and diplomacy and ceasefires and negotiations. It's over. The United Nations will never matter again. They will never stop a war again. They will never impose a ceasefire again. The United Nations is gone. It's over. And I don't miss it. And when people go and do these things at the UN, I don't even want them done. I don't even think the UN deserves the legitimacy of making a circus out of the circus that they've made. People have pointed out that Russia and China voted or abstained from the vote and proposed a different proposal, and all of that I think is relevant. There are reports of the various kinds of technological help that Russia and China are providing to Iran. But I think, look, Russia's 180 million people. China's 1.4 billion people. Both China and Russia are militarily formidable, technologically, scientifically formidable. But Iran at 90 million people is punching way above their weight right now. So if you take Russia, China, and Iran, I would say the country of the three of them that's punching most above their weight is Iran, not Russia or China, with all respect to both of them for sure. And that goes militarily, technologically, and everything else. Morally too, I'd say, given, what Iran, the kind of solidarity that Iran has shown to Palestine, which is not, Yemen, Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's nothing like that from other countries, right? So has to be recognized, I think. So I'm not that upset about the UN. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do this every time. So just wanted to say, I also join you all in wishing there was a veto, but this is not where it's going to be settled, right? This is going to be settled on the battlefield. That's why we're doing military analysis here. Okay, part 3, the nuclear issue. Let's do the nuclear issue again, okay? I mentioned Mao talking about the nuclear weapon as a paper tiger. And I traced this back. I'm going to give you the whole quote, okay? This is 1946. 1946, so America detonated 2 nuclear bombs in China's neighborhood in Japan around, not around, in 1945, so just a year before. And Mao is talking to an American journalist, and he says, the Chinese people, maybe this is a different part, but anyway, he says to Anna Louise Strong, I think is her name, and he's talking to her, and he says, she says, what, only by victory. So Mao says, only by victory in the struggle can a third world war be avoided. Otherwise it's unavoidable. And Strong says that's very clear, but suppose the United States uses the atom bomb. Suppose the United States bombs the Soviet Union from its bases in Iceland, Okinawa, and China. And Mao says the atom bomb is a paper tiger which the US reactionaries use to scare people. It looks terrible, but in fact it isn't. Of course, the atom bomb is a weapon of mass slaughter, but the outcome of a war is decided by the people, not by one or two new types of weapon. So then he goes on and talks about the ongoing war, right? Because this is 1946. Mao didn't really, the communists didn't take over China until 1949. So later on, when the Americans were threatening China with with nuclear warfare in the 1950s, before China got their own bomb, Mao kind of made this point again. He said, the Chinese people are not to be cowed by U.S. atomic blackmail. Our country has a population of 600 million and an area of 9,600,000 square kilometers. The United States cannot annihilate the Chinese nation with its small stack of atom bombs, even if the U.S. atom bombs were so powerful that when dropped on China, they would make a hole right through the earth, or even blow it up. That would hardly mean anything to the universe as a whole, though it might be a major event for the solar system. So he kind of gets into trolling, but I think the point that he makes is, I think, really sound and does apply to Iran. And I'm gonna get exactly to this point in a second. So how does this logic apply? Because there's two possibilities, okay? Either the Americans drop the nuclear bomb on Iran in a way that Iran can fight on, which is very possible. And if that is the case, the war will go on and Iran will destroy Israel's nuclear facility of Dimona, creating a radiation event that'll kill everybody. They'll destroy all the water plants, all the oil facilities. They'll make the rest of the region uninhabitable too. So if you destroy Iran, you will destroy the entire region. And maybe the Americans are fine with that. Maybe the Israelis are definitely fine with that. That's what they are about. They're about destruction and genocide and uninhabitability of planet Earth. And if they do that, that's not going to be the end of everything. It's going to be a very destructive event, a very horrible thing that Iran will very likely continue and recover from, and other societies in the region will also recover from in some different, diminished way. And we will all live on in a horrible, much worse world where nuclear events are part of warfare, and Israel is gone, and much of Palestine is gone, and much of Iran is gone, and all the Gulf states are gone, and radiation poisons generations of people. And maybe that's what happens. It's like the world seems to have moved on after the genocide in Gaza. Okay, so that's the first possibility, in which case the war just goes on. Or the US drops nukes in a way that permanently destroys everything and kills maybe everybody. And then there's nuclear winter, etc. And there's human extinction. So, like Mao said, kind of trolling, that would hardly mean anything to the universe as a whole. I think what he's saying there is, why worry about it if that's going to, if the Americans are going to do that, or if the Israelis, if the West has decided, let's put the Israelis in charge of the world and give them nuclear weapons to lord it over the world, and they decide to drop those nuclear weapons and end human civilization and life on Earth, well, what could Iran have done differently? Iran can't make Israelis not genocidal, right? Iran can't make Zionists other than they are. What Iran can do is make sure that they can, to any extent possible, survive and fight on, even if they're nuked. Let me put it even another way. people who are kind of sounding the alarm that Israel has nuclear weapons and the Americans have nuclear weapons and they're crazy. Iran knows, okay? Iran knows. And everything that Iran has done about Israel has been based on knowing that Israel has nuclear weapons and is this demonic entity that is very pleased to brandish and use them. That's why they have these underground missile cities. That's why they've done everything to bury their weapons and their weapons production and to keep it so far underneath that a lot of this infrastructure could survive a nuclear strike and that they can fight on, and they have dead man switches because they know. One quote from the IRGC, I didn't double check it, but it sounds right. It sounds like the kind of thing they would say is, let tyrants know that those who stood firm against the poisons of the past will not be intimidated by the technology of treachery today, and let the Americans do as they please. Another tweeter that I really like, I think they're based in South Africa, and they take the name of the South African Armed Struggle Organization, Sizwelo. He says, some people are saying, here, I'll share it with you guys. Some people are saying that Iran should cave or at least tread carefully before the US, but especially Israel, gets desperate and uses nuclear weapons. They say this as if a nuke is some kind of holistic magic bullet. But here's the thing. Contrary to popular belief, modern military industrial nations, which Iran is firmly one, are designed with survival deltas for exactly this kind of situation. From the start, it needs to be clear that any use of a nuke by the US-Israel axis of death would not be about destroying Iran's nuclear facilities, which we all know were completely obliterated last year. It would be instead aimed at decapitating Iran's war-making capabilities, which in simple terms refers to its military facilities dispersed across the country. The problem here is that the attacker would need what military people call an area denial strategy, and to meaningfully degrade dispersed missile farms and military logistics, you're not talking about one or two tactical nuclear weapons. Instead, you're looking at a campaign that would require multiple detonations across a wide geographic area that yields large enough to render vast areas of land operationally unusable. But if the targets are indeed underground facilities, Iran has sites like Orab 44 and the Fordo enrichment plant, which are buried so deep that even high-yield tactical nuclear weapons are not guaranteed to destroy the assets within. He goes on and on about the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse, but also Iran's national information network, legacy analog and semi-analog systems. Iran would target Israel's Dimona facility, which is lightly shielded, and toxic dust, toxic rain. So while the goal would be regime change in Iran, the resulting catastrophe would solidify anti-Israel sentiment worldwide, making integration in the region and the world at large impossible. Yes, a nuke would cause enormous humanitarian catastrophe, but still leaving Iran with strike capability. This is the worst of both worlds. Israel would have paid the full political and environmental price without achieving the military objective. The uncomfortable reality for the Zionists is that Iran has essentially achieved functional deterrence without possessing a nuclear weapon. That's the real strategic achievement, and why that just nuke them argument reflects a misunderstanding of what deterrence really requires. Deterrence is about making the cost of attack exceed any plausible benefit, and Iran has painstakingly done that without nuclear weapons. So the idea that Iran should simply capitulate to the threat of US-Israeli nukes ignores the fact that their entire security doctrine has been built around making such capitulation unnecessary. So I think that's really solid analysis by Sizwe. And I think that, the last point tonight on this, because I know this is probably going to come out again and again, and I will address it again and again because it's so important, and it's as I'll get to in part 8 of my video. We're finishing up part 3. As I'll get to in part 8, I think it will be one of the last things that the Americans and Israelis are talking about before they lose, if it goes the way that I think it's going. So, look, one more point, as promised. If Iran's strategy works and they defeat the US and Israel, nuclear powers, without using nuclear weapons, this is like yet another massive gift to humanity and to non-proliferation and climate change and a whole bunch else. So imagine if Iran, through asymmetric warfare and through the minimum necessary use of force, defeats these crazed nuclear powers without it ever coming to nuclear war. That's amazing. And that could not have been achieved without their fatwa, without their open decision to not pursue nuclear weapons. So, you know, if you think that, if you agree, you should be looking for ways to help that outcome, as opposed to asking them to surrender to the nuke threat, which will only encourage more nuclear threats and is not how you're supposed to approach it in game theory or any other theory. So, you know, and for those of us in the West, again, like, we would not have contributed either way, whether this does end in nuclear holocaust or not. It seems to me is like a decision either by the elites of these countries that we have no leverage over, or you know, yeah, basically by them. So we wouldn't have had much to do about it, and go, you know, trying to warn about it on social media isn't, I don't think, a super constructive thing. Speaking of the West and what we are doing here, I was shown this by in Al Akhbar, which I think is what's the news? It's an Arabic news site, but this is English. And my attention was called to this by some friends. I think some were involved in writing this, toward a revolutionary charter for comprehensive liberation. And this is really cool because it's basically like some of these Palestinian Arab leaders, including Ghassan Abu Sitta and Sbey, Wissam Al-Faqawi, Salah Hamouri, and others. So this is like, I really like this because it's the same wavelength that I'm on, in the sense that we're denouncing, we're bashing nonviolence here. And I really like this. You know, here's what some intellectuals have sought to promote Western friendly approaches while normalizing conciliatory defeatist frameworks. They introduce terms like weapons regulation rather than by calling it the proper term disarmament, to strip the armed struggle of its liberational character and recast it as a procedural or security matter. Here's another one. Global solidarity is held up as an alternative to struggle in the field. And I think, you know, when I saw this sentence, I felt like, ooh, because I feel like I've been guilty of that. Definitely pre-2023, for some time before that, not right before. Resistance is declared dead and the Palestinian people are relegated to passive victims awaiting a global awakening that has been promised for decades but never materialized. It represents an inversion of reality. Field resistance is the primary force and solidarity follows in its wake. Replacing resistance with solidarity undermines popular agency and scorns the bloodshed of countless sacrifices. So I really, check that out. It's called Toward a Revolutionary Charter for Comprehensive Liberation. It's in Al Akhbar. And do not substitute solidarity for resistance. And yeah, so I wanted to call attention to that here at the end of this nuclear discussion. Okay, number 4, I want to explain a little bit about why it might be exotic to our eyes the way that, and possibly even frustrating in that like tit for tat sense, that Iran is so exclusively focusing on strictly military targets. And now they've announced that they're moving on to banks and corporations. There's some articles about, that thing I talked about before, blind, deplete, disarm, I think it was. And there's an article in Al Jazeera, which, use with caution, you guys, Al Jazeera. It's by an Iranian, obviously from the name, Arash Marzaban Mir, blinding U.S. eyes in the Middle East. And it's a very detailed analysis of the way that Iran has targeted these batteries and how missile defense works and how the different radars. I watched a Theodore Postal video on Dialogue Works, very good breakdown of how the different radars work at different angles and frequencies, and how missile defense works and how it breaks down, and why the radars are so important. The long distance radars are so important, and these steps, this methodical way that Iran has gone about disarming the ability to see. I think that because we're so used to the way the Israelis fight wars and the way the U.S. fights wars, that we don't, I think we've lost the historical context, because in our lifetimes, we haven't really seen this, because we've seen the U.S. and Israel attack populations directly. We've seen them attack civil society directly, children directly, hospitals, medical workers directly. And Iran is attacking military targets only. The Palestinian resistance was focusing on the military hardware, the tanks, always the tanks and the armored personnel carriers. Just that was almost all that you saw them do. Sometimes ambushes on infantry in houses, but like it was almost always attacking the armor. They're attacking the hardest point. They're literally, the Palestinian resistance was attacking the armor. And Iran is attacking, the forward radars, the surveillance system. Hezbollah attacked the surveillance infrastructure. And why? And that's because if you go back far enough in history to before Western armies were fighting colonized peoples, you would see that their military conflict used to be conflict between militaries. It's only, the past, 200 some years where the West was fighting people they colonized, where they're just fighting the society directly instead of trying to fight the military. Because even when you look at the 40s, 50s, 60s wars that Israel fought against the Arab countries, they were fighting Arab states that had just become, in relative terms, they'd just become independent. And Israel, you could say, oh yeah, Israel was just brand new created in 48, but it wasn't. It was a Western country with unlimited Western support from France and then from America and Britain, and weapons and trained people. They were colonizers, and they were attacking Palestinian and Arab society. And then they were attacking these armies that were bootstrapped, a decade or so before. It was not an army against an army, because those post-colonial armies weren't ready yet. And so Iran has done something really, really different. Since 1979, they have built not a peer level to the US, but good enough, despite colonization, good enough to take them on. and they're doing things that you know, recently post-colonial armies just couldn't do. Like, even, you know, if you think of the Vietnamese, it was a guerrilla struggle, right? They knew they couldn't hit American bases and things like that the way that the Iranians can. So this is so new to our eyes, but there were centuries and centuries and centuries of military conflicts between militaries. So this is actually somewhat more normal than we are used to seeing. And that's why it looks kind of strange to us, I think, or at least to me. You can tell me if it's, people love to always has been me when I say something is new. So feel free to go ahead and do that in the comments. It's no problem. I don't mind being always has been. So in the time that since I saw you last, the new leader was appointed in Iran. I think he's wounded. He gave a speech, but he didn't come out. And I guess, you know, it as much as like all the leaders did go out for Al-Quds Day, Pezeshkian was there, Abbas Araghchi, Ali Larjani, they're all out there on the street shaking people's hands and stuff while the bombs are coming down, which is, you know, that's quite a sight in itself. It's a pretty legendary kind of way to be. I understand if Mojtaba Khamenei doesn't do that because, you know, he doesn't want to give them, the Israelis and the U.S., that great victory of, you know, saying, oh, we got Khamenei and then we got his son, haha, right? Because that's how they count victory. They don't have anything else. They don't do anything else. They're sort of sadistic, and they think that sadism wins wars. But anyway, Mojtaba Khamenei gave a speech. It was basically a speech of, you know, continuity. We're going to continue on this path of resistance. You know, he praised the Iranian nation. He cited some verses. So there was, you know, it was a message of like, we trust in the people and admiration for the people, which I thought was really good. Thanking all the allies, thanking Yemen and Lebanon. So, you know, what you would expect from the new leader, for sure. That's part 4. Part 4 was the reason Iran is targeting military targets first. Okay, part 5, the economic war. So one surprise for me from the past 2 weeks was, you know, all this time in the lead up to this war, I heard people talking about how Iran could close the Straits of Hormuz. And I always thought, like, okay, they can close the Straits of Hormuz, but there are always other ways around the planet Earth. The Earth is round. The Earth is not flat. You can't just close a choke point and stop the world economy. And, you know, in some sense, I was right, but I was also wrong, because it is a particularly special choke point, and you don't need to stop everything from flowing to catastrophically raise the price of the foundational commodity of the world economy today, the grease of the wheels of the world economy. And so they did. But the other point that I always thought when that threat came up, I thought, well, if it's all or nothing like that, how can they do it? And of course, it turns out it's not all or nothing, and that it's much more of a semi-permeable membrane that Iran has such control over that they can decide whose tankers can pass and whose can't. And that, you know, I was chatting with John Elmer from Electronic Intifada, who I'm sure you all know and who you watch the Resistance Report, but he said something that I've been turning over in my mind. He said, you know, how long, if only Iranian allowed tankers can pass, how long before Iran gets rich? How long before Iran gets richer? And I think that kind of opens up, if you think that through, if you think that question through to its logical conclusions, there's a whole different kind of world economy here in which Iran plays a very different role. And if you think of all the glitz and the glamour of the Gulf states of Dubai and, the rest of the UAE and Doha and Qatar and Kuwait and all the wealth that they have and all that unbelievable oil wealth, so much wealth, they don't know what to do. They make these sovereign wealth funds, then they buy useless American weapons. They recycle it. They buy treasury bills. They're not allowed to invest in the US economy. There's all this, they buy gold, I guess. And there's this way where the super wealth of that region, of that oil, of that resource, has become the underpinning of an unreal theme park style place in the Gulf, but also the underpinning of the entire economy, the whole entire Western, petrodollar economy. And if Iran decides whether that oil is allowed to exit or not, then Iran can begin to capture the wealth and distribute that wealth as they see fit, instead of the Gulf monarchs doing that, or instead of the Americans doing that, or both, or whatever. And that is a very different world. It's a very different economic reality. And that is one thing that Mojtaba Khamenei said. He said, we're going to take compensation. We're going to take reparations for the damage that's been done. And if that includes sanctions, imagine if that includes the sanctions and the destruction, if they decide they're going to use their reparations to fund the reconstruction of Palestine, of Gaza, then just the world economy is going to look very different. And it could be that it has to, for Iran, again, to feel safe, right? If Iran is saying we need to never be threatened by America again and Israel again, then where you're looking at a disarmament of Israel, you're looking at no U.S. bases, and then you're looking at Iran becoming, through control of the Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, and through that kind of regional hegemony, they will be playing a much bigger role in deciding how the wealth of the region is directed. As the regional hegemon, which they're going to have to step up to be if they want to be safe from America and Israel. If they really want America out of the region, they're going to be the ones who make those security arrangements with the peoples of the region, of the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. So, okay. Are the Marines headed for Karg Island? Are 5,000 Marines going to try to take this indefensible island? It's indefensible. They could probably take it, but remember, they were pushed out of all of their nearby bases. They're going to be pushed out of this one as well. It is a death trap. They will be facing thousands of drones. But nonetheless, maybe they are. And the goal could be, again, maybe it's stupid, but you notice the Israelis who have called up 100,000 or maybe 450,000 reserves are not sending 5,000 of those reserves to try to take this island. They're sending the Americans. Why are they sending these Americans into this death trap? Well, it could be that if they take huge casualties, maybe that'll generate some anger and some popular support for further death traps for further engagement in this war, which is definitely in the Israeli interest. So it could be this is another sacrifice that the Israelis and the American Zionists are planning to sacrifice these Marines for the sake of a political goal to try to further enmesh the US into a war, into this war. And there are various enmeshment things that are going on beyond this one. But in trying to achieve enmeshment and try to achieve restructure alliances through this kind of foul play is definitely one of the main things that the Israelis and the Americans are doing here, and I'll get into that in the end in part 8. Okay, so Azerbaijan. Remember, I think last week I said this might fizzle. It seems to have fizzled for now. Azerbaijan is not going to go and bash their head against the wall attacking Iran. Good for Iran and good for Azerbaijan, I'd say, that they're not. Azerbaijan is still sending oil to Israel. They're still a big help to Israel. So, and they might still be the corridor. I know Saudi is a corridor for bombing Iran. So all of those bases are still on the target list of Iran. Iran has said they're targeting any base from which they're being attacked. And so I imagine that's going to continue. We're on wave 54 of Iranian missile attacks. And there's no sign of stopping. In the time since I saw you guys, the American Israelis attacked a Tehran oil storage facility, creating an environmental and public health disaster. Iran attacked various facilities in the UAE and Bahrain, and said we're expanding to corporations, maybe the Trump family assets, etc. There's a joke going online, which I actually think is like one of those funny because it's true things. I'll show you this. You've probably seen that there are realistic decoys of weapons, planes, tanks, and stuff, but probably the ideal decoy would be if Iran could make decoy hospitals that would really draw the fire of the Israelis and the Americans, right? So last thing under the economic, I'm also going to talk a bit more about oil, but the economic war, Iran announced, I think yesterday, that they're going to attack Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Microsoft, Oracle, ExxonMobil, Citigroup, Amazon Web Services, NSO Group, KKR, Boston Consulting, Bain and Company, Trafigura. So they do this. They don't sneak attack. That's not their way. They've announced what they're going to do, and then once they've announced it, it usually happens. Okay. So just one last point on the oil story and how much things could transform on that front. If you think about Iraq, where the Americans have announced that all personnel should leave Iraq, the U.S. has a special, since they invaded and occupied Iraq in 2003, they have a special kind of control. All the revenue from Iraq goes into an American account, and then the Americans decide how much of that the Iraqis can get. I just did an episode for my podcast, historical podcast, on the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, and that's the exact same arrangement the British had with Persia, with Iran under Shah, the original Shah Pahlavi, and before, starting in 1918 when they occupied Iran. So it's very familiar, this arrangement where all the money goes to the Americans for this other country's oil, and then the Americans can dish the money back as they see fit. And I believe that's what they did to Venezuela as well, since they kidnapped President Maduro and put him in an American jail and are extorting control of Venezuela's oil ever since then, at the beginning of January. And so ends part 5. Part 6, the Lebanon front. So Jolani in Syria says they're going to join Israel in attacking Lebanon. Iraq has promised in turn, if they do, the militias in Iraq, the pro-Iran forces in Iraq, which are substantial and formidable, have promised that if Syria attacks Lebanon, Iraq will take parts of Syria. Iran also has said that if the Americans were to unilaterally stop attacking Iran, but Israel kept attacking Lebanon, Iran would continuously attack Israel anyway. So there is this concept now of a comprehensive, it's all for one and one for all, and that includes coordinated missile attacks by Iran and Hezbollah, with Iran somehow attacking, almost operating effectively as an air force and an air cover for Hezbollah. The Lebanese government is trying to address this problem with Hezbollah by finding a way to surrender to Israel, but they can't surrender on Hezbollah's behalf. And Hezbollah has said, "You can surrender all day. We're not going to follow suit." And the Lebanese army has also announced that they are not going to go and fight or disarm Hezbollah. We affirm, one of the statements that they made, a statement by the national officers said, "We affirm that protecting the homeland, its sovereignty, and the unity of its territories remains the supreme objective which we have sworn to defend. It is a national institution uniting all the sons of the homeland and a fence protecting countries from dangers and safeguarding its unity and sovereignty." So they're not trying to do this. They're not trying to go and have a civil war with Hezbollah, but they might. That might be the case. And then Hezbollah will have to just take over Lebanon, I think. So I also want to call your attention to Ali Mortada. He's not just a handsome guy. He's not just a funny hello my enemies video person. He's been on Twitter, and he does his own kind of Twitter style sit rep, explaining the trajectory of the battle from March 2nd to the 11th, including different strategies, foiling ground positions, qualitative aerial confrontation. The number of operations that Hezbollah is doing is large. They're inside what they call occupied Palestine in various points. They are foiling the Israeli invasion. They're making it very difficult for the Israelis to muster, especially given that they can be hit by massive Iranian missiles as well as Hezbollah missiles and drones. So there's a big battle at Hiyam that I think is now, the Israelis have withdrawn again. This on March 14th, Ali Mortada described another set of operations, strategic and high quality, armor hunting ambushes. He calls it down here the saturating the forward edge, synchronized fire, and the success of the complex ambush strategy. Zero distance face off with Radwan soldiers. So the elite commandos of Hezbollah are fighting against the Israelis there. Now, Naim Qassem, the Secretary General, he made a speech also on Al-Quds Day, and there's a lot interesting in there. One of the things that struck me was he said, "We've raised the alarm several times that the opportunity will end, that there's a limit to the continuation of the aggression, that there's a limit to patience running out. We met at the leadership level 3 times across 3 stations and consulted on responding to the aggression. We felt the timing was not appropriate. We were convinced of giving an additional chance, and we were convinced that the circumstances were not suitable. There were parties that contacted us and insisted that we give them an additional chance for the political track. In the last month, the Israeli debate was about the necessity of carrying out a major action against Lebanon, but the debate was over the timing. We found that in what happened after the aggression on Iran and after the martyrdom of Imam Khamenei, the circumstances became suitable for us to confront this enemy. So he says, when the battle, on the one hand, he killed our Imam and our leader. On the other hand, the enemy has been aggressing for 15 months and will not stop. And then when the battle coincides with what is happening in Iran, we can weaken the enemy. So this is what I thought when Hezbollah joined. I thought this was more about opportunity and not about like any kind of desperation. And so that's, what Naim Qassem, I think, affirms here. He says, this is a chance that we saw with fighting the Iran while Israel is fighting the Iranians. He said, we've prepared ourselves for a long confrontation. The enemy will see our might. Its threats do not frighten us. They will not be able to divide the people from us. There's no such thing as defeat or surrender in our dictionary. We will not retreat because this concerns our existence. So, that's what he says. The resistance is ongoing. The battlefield is the area of honor. The word now belongs to the field. We are ready for it. So that is the Lebanon front. And I think that the thing to remember before we enter this final phase of this very long sit rep, everybody, is that Iran and the axis of resistance still have huge reserves that have not been brought into this battle, right? They have their entire ground force, which will defend Iran. And if any one of Iran's 15 neighbors gets any bad ideas, the Iranian army is huge and is there. I don't think they would need that army to deal with a marine invasion of Karg Island. They probably could do that just with drones. So I hope that idea is abandoned. But I don't know. I think the Marines have a history of doing what they're ordered to do. So it could really be a death trap that's about to unfold. But Iran has their whole army, and they have other reserves. Okay, Yemen has said they've said a couple of interesting things. They said that they're ready. They've made the decision to go into the war, and they're just, they're going to you'll see when you see, basically. Remember that Yemen also has trained a massive army, and they are ready to do a ground war. And al-Bukhaiti, who's one of their spokespeople, he said this. He said this war is going to end in a ground war. And, we've always, everybody knows this. Everybody who follows military affairs knows that you can't do everything remotely. Even Iran, with its formidable missile force, is not going to be able to do everything that they want to do without any ground troops getting involved. And Yemen has said, if you let us get there, we will free Palestine. And all they want is a corridor. All they want is a corridor across the peninsula to get there. And the way things are developing, that could actually happen, even in the context of this war that's going on. It's, strange things are happening that could never be imagined. And that's the realm we're in now. We're in the realm of strange, unimaginable things. And, okay, so 7 and 8 are about the various misfortunes. You guys heard about the accidents that are piling up. Many American service people are dying in accidents. There was a fire aboard the Gerald Ford, which also had the toilet incident. The Lincoln, the USS Abraham Lincoln, has withdrawn. The Iranians said they struck it. Trump said that it's actually AI fake, deep fakes with the mainstream media. So Iran, according to Trump, Iran and the mainstream media have gotten together to produce this fake news because Iran is already defeated, but they have AI. So they're using the American mainstream media to discredit Trump, who has a very high approval rating. I'm verbatim quoting the Truth Social post here. So the refuelers also fell from the sky. They're not from friendly or hostile fire. So I think in this pattern of misfortunes, we also could see something about how U.S. losses or attrition is going to continue to be reported and or denied. So all we know what Iran said they're sending, and we know what the Americans are reporting, and the Israelis aren't reporting anything. We all watched Netanyahu have coffee. He didn't actually sip the coffee. Coffee looked unchanged, but he did have all 5 fingers on both hands. So, that's what they're reporting. So that's all we could go on. So, okay, now part 8. I just want to look at the space. We'll conclude with looking at the space of options that the Americans have. They started off with the idea that Iran was a frail dictatorship, so they could kill Khamenei and win. Actually, they killed Khamenei, and then they in the process activated this unfolding plan, which has destroyed their bases, caused them to leave the region for the most part, is seeing Israeli military infrastructure destroyed day by day in a grinding way. The Strait of Hormuz has become gated, unavailable to them, available to China and others by special permission slip from the Iranians. Some of the oil infrastructure threatened, some of it destroyed, and no end in sight. So this is a methodical plan that is unfolding ever since 40 minutes after they killed the 86-year-old supreme leader. Okay, so the next idea was threaten a bombing of Tehran, right? A big strategic bombing of Tehran. Remember in 1999, NATO threatened to flatten Belgrade. A NATO official, I think from Finland, he said, if you don't give up Slobodan Milosevic, Belgrade will look like this. And he wiped a table. And that intimidated Milosevic, and Milosevic gave up. But Iran doesn't care. So Iran has said, we are going to avenge the blood of our people. They've taken a very vengeful approach. France showed up on the battlefield. Maybe there are other allies, but immediately as they showed up, their interests in Kurdistan were attacked. A French officer was killed. Macron tweeted that he died for France. In fact, he died for Israel and genocide and maybe Epstein. What about killing the leadership of Iran? Is that an option? The leadership isn't in hiding, and now the Iranian military has announced that they are earnestly going to kill Israeli leaders and American officers. So all they're doing now, it's a different world. The Iranians are trying to kill you too. You are trying to kill the Iranians. The Iranians are trying to kill you. Israel, the Israelis are in the region, and after Netanyahu's whereabouts were unclear, and they released this other AI video of Netanyahu, the Iranian military said it doesn't matter whether he's alive or dead. If he's alive, we'll kill him. So they've also made a video you might have seen where they showed that they know the Israeli pilots that we're participating in bombing Iran, that we're participating in bombing Gaza. So it's another kind of threat where they show how much they know, a list of military targets, and they show these pilots and they show their names, their phone numbers, all this intelligence about them, and basically announcing that they intend to find them and they intend to kill them. So this whole assassination-based warfare that the Israelis have, where they're like, we're going to kill the leaders, and they've got this glee about killing the leaders, and the Iranians have now finally said, you know, you can kill our leaders, and we're going to kill your leaders. And so it is this place where they've gotten to, where again, we're not doing tit for tat anymore. We're not doing reciprocal strikes anymore. You're trying to kill Iranian leaders and they're trying to kill you. So assassination isn't probably going to solve the problem. It's going to get a lot more Israelis, especially who are in the region. Americans can fly back to America, even though they're not. They're headed more they have more Americans headed. These Marines are headed to Iran. But okay, how about this enmeshment I mentioned? What about trying to get Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Oman fighting Iran? So several drone attacks have happened on Turkey, Saudi, Oman, and the Iranians have said this was not us. You guys should be wary that the US and the Israelis are trying to get you into the war. Turkey made a formal announcement saying we're not going to fall for it. So there's an attempt to try to get a war going by Iran's neighbors on Iran so that Israel and the US can just watch and enjoy without being targeted. But Iran is very clear. This is part of why being not sneaky, the way Iran is not sneaky, benefits Iran, right? Israel is known for lying. Israel is known for being sneaky. They're proud of deception. And so Iran says, we're going to hit this, we're going to hit this, and we're going to hit that. And then they do. 1, 2, 3. Then when there's a 4 over there in Turkey, Iran says, we didn't say we were going to hit that, and we didn't hit that. So you guys need to figure out what's happening there. And whereas when Israel does all these deceptions, they can be blamed. It's quite clear that it could very well be them when these things happen, and they're unannounced, and Iran doesn't take credit for them. What about destroying Iran's oil? So Karg Island is the major export terminal for Iranian oil. Iran has the ability to destroy everyone's oil. If they start that destruction of oil, Iran will destroy all the oil facilities of the Gulf and of Saudi Arabia, and then nobody gets any oil. They might end up doing that anyway, but if you want to go to that world, Iran will survive. Every country with extensive agriculture will survive. It'll be a very different world without fossil fuels. I'm sure China can step up their solar production even more. We can move to renewables. We probably have to do that anyway. But it's not Iran that's going to suffer the most from that, if that is where it goes. And it might go there. And the same goes for destroying Iran's water. So destroying Iran's desalinization plant. They attacked Iran's desalinization plant, and Iran attacked one of the neighbors. And one tweeter called Policy Tensor said, this is deterrence that's happened, this kind of water deterrence. And they said, let's hope deterrence holds. Otherwise, most of the microstates will have to be abandoned. So, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and UAE all depend a lot in on desalinated water. Iran, very little. Saudi Arabia, 20%. Oman, 20%. The others are more, 40s and 50s and up. Okay, so none of these options are really available. Which means the US and Israel are eventually going to go back to at least threatening, if not, and Trump has already threatened nuclear warfare. But in which case, that also destroys the whole region at the very least, and or maybe brings about nuclear winter and ends civilization, or and the war goes on. So even the threat of the nuke, right? Let's remember the kind of conflict we're in now, where Iran has snapped into a state of recognition that negotiation is pointless, ceasefires are pointless, and Israel needs to be disarmed. Now, what about if Israel keeps brandishing their nuke and threatening their nuke? Well, that's going to convince more and more of the world, starting with Iran, that Israel needs to be gone. There's no faster path to forfeiting this right to exist that Israel has than to constantly threaten nuclear holocaust on everybody. So it's not great strategy on their part to continuously talk about the nuclear threat and to continuously threaten it. We are all now in this world where Iran very much understands that they are dealing with lunatics, and they are trying to do everything they need to do to feel safe as a country and as a civilization. So threatening them with nuclear warfare at this stage, in this state that they're in, before, when they were in that negotiation phase, maybe those kinds of threats were a good thing to do in the negotiation. Now, in this phase that they're in, where they're in this we want to avenge the wrong that's been done to us and to Gaza. We want to guarantee our safety for the future. This is not a great time to be threatening them with nuclear warfare. I don't think that's wise. So that is that concludes part 8, and that concludes the sit rep for tonight. I think I may have come in at under 90 minutes. Thank you for hanging in there. Hang in there has a whole new meaning, right? Hang in there till the end of the sit rep now is something that I'm having to ask you. Okay. Who knows what's going to happen in this coming week? I will be back in no less than a week. Unlikely that I'll be here before 1 week passes. I know people ask me if I'm going to come back during the week, but I won't unless it's exceptional. I won't. You guys also have, plenty of other things to watch. You have the live stream from Electronic Intifada on Thursday. So you can wait. You can wait until next week. You can wait a week for me. Okay, guys. Until then, hang in there. I'll see you in the next one.